I'm Edward Moorfield, publisher of CityBizList. I'm honored today to be interviewing Alec, the author of The Industries of the Future.
So one of the most striking things that I saw in, my 25 circumferences of the globe researching this book was the rise of robots in Japan. So apparently in the United States and in Western societies, we have this deep-seated fear of robots and of bringing to life that which we ought not, from Icarus's waxed wings to Frankenstein. We have a cultural predisposition against bringing things to life or making things more human. The Japanese don't have that. And that is part of why they are creating so many of the world's most futuristic robots. And two that most struck me were Robina and her brother, Humanoid, which were robots created by Toyota, yes, the car company. And it was basically to solve the problem of elder care in Japan. Japan has the world's longest living population, something like 83 for women and 79 for men, and they're continuing to grow older. And because of relatively low birth rates and extremely restrictive immigration policies, there are literally not enough grandkids to take care of the grandparents. And so there's now a competition between Toyota and Honda and others to create robots that will take care of the grandparents, from lifting them out of bed to playing the violin for them to entertain them. It's hard to imagine anything more human or anything more intimate than taking care of elderly citizens. But what's fascinating is the drive that Japan does have to now see if robots can do this work. So it's interesting to me to see where the sort of robots of the future are going to emerge from. On the one hand, there are big technology companies like Uber and Google who are making very aggressive investments in this space. So Uber, for example, has a fairly remarkable facility that they've co-developed with Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where in essence I think they're trying to replace their most expensive resource, which is their drivers. And so a lot of the drive to create autonomous vehicles is coming through this partnership between Uber and Carnegie Mellon's robotics labs. Another example is Google. I think that now that the Google founders have grown wealthier than they know what to do with, I think that their passions have turned in part towards robotics. And they are interested in taking their capabilities in analytics, in big data analytics, and applying it more and more into hardware. And there's no more interesting form of hardware than robotics. And so from the Google car to some of the purchases they've made of both artificial intelligence and robotics companies, I see robots as being sort of the next greenfield space for Google to really explore. But taking relatively big companies like Uber and Google aside, I do think that there's an argument to be made that the most interesting and important robots of the future will come from companies that we haven't heard of before. They will be startups that then become big themselves, just as Uber and Google did in the past. And I've seen examples of this, for example, in Israel, where there are venture funds that have been created with 9 figures worth of very early stage high risk capital. I've seen the Israelis, the Swedes, the Germans, as well as the Americans, the Japanese, and the South Koreans do very interesting early stage investing here. The thesis being that, just as was the case with the internet, where it was going to be sort of 23-year-olds who are going to build the next big companies, so too will that prove to be the case with robotics. And so the venture capitalists are lined up and investing. I think that when you think about the jobs that have been replaced by automation in the past, they're principally the jobs of men with strong shoulders, doing work that is manual and routine in ports, factories, mines, and mills. The kind of labor that's going to be displaced in the future, I think, is going to be of a much more varied type. So first of all, we have to look at what the number one occupation among men in the United States is driving a motor vehicle. Our bus drivers, our truck drivers, and our taxi drivers, that's the number one occupation for men in the US. And if that becomes replaced by driverless cars, the amount of displacement is going to be enormous. And now I don't necessarily think this is going to happen in the next 10 years, but it would not surprise me if it began happening in 10 years. Similarly, there are other jobs that we think of as not necessarily, lending themselves to being replaced, but I think that they can. And it's because the kind of work being done by robots is going from being merely manual and routine to increasingly cognitive and non-routine. So in the same way in which we saw bank tellers replaced by ATMs and travel agents replaced by websites, so too do I think that the people who we check in with at the hotel, our lawyers, and even our hair washers at the salon. I think that there are people who are developing automated solutions to all of these things, and it's remarkable to see it unfold. Most people who write books about the future, they write either utopian or dystopian books. It's either, oh, we're gonna live to be 150 years old, happy, wealthy, lacking for nothing, or, written with sort of eyes shut and fists clenched, railing against the future. I think that life is much more up the middle. We're not gonna have a utopian future. We're not gonna have a dystopian future. Life's a little bit more up the middle. And I'm net optimistic. Even when I think about robotics and the kind of labor that it can and will displace, we have to recognize what else it'll do. Like if, for example, safe autonomous vehicles take over the work of drivers, well, guess what? 3 million people die every year in car accidents. That's a huge number. If suddenly 1 million or 2 million people are not dying, that's kind of a big deal. Similarly, if our surgeries, which are assisted by robots, are more effective, well, we're living longer and healthier lives. Automation typically has displaced work that is dull, dangerous, and dreary. So if the kind of labor that is being substituted is the lowest form of labor, and if we are going to go on and make higher and